Coffee cools, but tempers ignite into betrayal. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I'm your host, Harrington. Tell me where you're listening from. I value your words. The story begins now. You wouldn't think a cup of coffee could start trouble in Nero Wolfe's house. Coffee there is a ritual, a liturgy, a sacred pause in the machinery of the day, attended to with as much precision as a priest pouring sacramental wine. Wolfe won't touch it before 11 in the morning or after 9 at night, and he won't permit any bean that hasn't been roasted, ground, and brewed under Fritz's solemn supervision. That's the law, and I've seen tougher men than me fold under his glare for suggesting instant coffee. So naturally, when the disturbance came, it came in the form of coffee. Not the steaming cup I was nursing at the kitchen table, but the knock at the door that ruined the mood. It was just after 10 o'clock at night, a time when Wolfe expects silence, orchids, and digestion. A knock at that hour could only mean business, and business at that hour was a felony against Wolfe's comfort. I went to the door with the kind of reluctance you usually reserve for jury duty. When I opened it, a woman was standing there, tall, trim, and wearing a coat that belonged in the glossy ads of a fashion magazine. Her gloves clutched a small package as if it might explode. She didn't wait for me to ask questions. "Mr. Wolfe must see me at once," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. That's always the kicker with them. They think Wolfe's just sitting in there, waiting for a last-minute emergency, like a cappy with the meter running. I told her the truth. Wolfe does not see anyone at once. He doesn't see people at once in the morning, afternoon, or any time unless it suits him. But she shoved the package at me. "Please. It concerns him. It's personal." That gave me pause. Personal wasn't a word often applied to Nero Wolfe. He lived in a fortress of routine and defended it like Verdun. Anything personal was a breach in the walls. I studied her. She wasn't a phony. She had too much tightness around the mouth and not enough polish in her desperation. Still, I don't usher people into Wolfe's sanctuary just because they bring props. "Lady," I said, "Mr. Wolfe's idea of a personal crisis is running out of Szechuan peppercorns. If this has to do with anything else, you'll have to tell me more." She looked me square in the eye, then unwrapped the package just enough for me to see what was inside. It was a silver coffee pot, dented and blackened as if it had been rescued from a fire. That did it. I didn't know why, but something about the sight of that battered piece of metal had the ring of a gong you couldn't ignore. I told her to wait, shut the door, and headed for the office to break the news to Wolfe. He was in his chair, of course, arranged behind his desk like a Buddha who'd traded enlightenment for beer. He was digesting, eyes half closed, one hand resting on the arm of the chair, the other on a book he wasn't reading. I gave him the headline version. "There's a woman at the door with a coffee pot. Says it's personal." His eyes opened a fraction. "Pui, coffee at this hour is insupportable." "Maybe," I said, "but it looks like the pot lost a duel with a flamethrower. She says it concerns you." Wolfe's eyes stayed on me. He didn't move, but something did. A faint twitch in the corner of his mouth. Not amusement, not irritation. Recognition. "Bring her in, Archie," he said. "And the pot." And that was how a battered silver coffee pot broke into the sanctity of Nero Wolfe's brownstone and started the affair. I brought her and the pot into the office and set the battered silver on Wolfe's desk blotter, careful to keep it away from anything that might object. The thing had a dignity that the dents couldn't erase. Up close, the blackening wasn't uniform. Someone had held flame to it in strokes and spirals, like a painter with a grudge. On the bellied side, half hidden in the soot, a crest caught the lamplight, a rampant stag over a ribbon. I knew it before the letters under it came clear. "Rustermans," I said. Her eyes flicked to me. Wolfe's didn't flick anywhere. He just breathed once, slow, and said, "Your name." "Evelyn Reiter," she said. I handle procurement and front-of-house coordination at Rusterman's. Mr. Wolfe, I wouldn't have come at this hour, but—" She stopped. Words were lining up behind her teeth and elbowing for position. "Sit," Wolfe told her. He didn't offer comfort. He never does. He let the chair do that work. "Explain." She sat like a woman who had practiced being composed and then gotten ambushed by the real thing. At 6 this evening we hosted a private dinner, 10 covers, in the Bordeaux room. A venture capitalist, his counsel, 2 rivals who wanted not to be seen together, and their attachés. You know how it goes. They wanted discretion with the sauce. Everything ran to schedule. Coffee service at 8:30. Half an hour later, a runner from our receiving entrance delivered that to my apartment door with a note. She gestured at the silver corpse. The runner was a stranger. He vanished. "Describe the note," Wolfe said. I brought it. She reached into her bag, produced an envelope that had been opened with haste rather than art, and handed it to me. I took the single card out with the delicacy you reserve for spiders and expensive lace. On thick cream stock, in letters that had been printed rather than written, it read, "Ask Nero Wolfe how bitter tastes." Fritz could have walked in then with a trumpet, and it would have been less of a disturbance. The air changed temperature. The orchids upstairs might have felt it. Wolfe didn't move, but the set of his hands changed. He was now holding on to the arms of the chair, not to stand, which he wouldn't, but to root deeper. "Tell me," he said, "exactly where that pot belongs." "In the sideboard of the Bordeaux room," she said. It was there at the start of service. The pot used at the table was a duplicate kept in the pantry. After coffee, I went to check the room. The sideboard was closed. The pot was gone. I assumed the pantry had switched them for polishing. It happens. I didn't think more until the doorbell at my building rang. "Your apartment," I said. "How far from Rusterman's?" 6 blocks. I walked home at 9:15. The runner rang 9:40. Wolfe reached toward the pot, not to touch it, and stopped, 2 inches of fat forefinger suspended like a metronome given up on time. "Archie." "Gloves?" I asked. He nodded. I fetched a pair from the drawer and pulled them on. The pot was heavier than it looked. The lid was there, but sitting a shade off true, and a tiny screw that should have secured the hinge had gone AWOL. I set it on a clean section of the blotter and eased the lid up. The smell that came out was a ghost, coffee and something that had lived a harder life. Char, yes, but under it a tang, sharp and metallic, like a coin pressed to the tongue. "Don't sniff it like a beagle," Wolfe said. "Briefly will serve." He leaned back. "Miss Reiter, did anyone at the dinner complain of the coffee?" "No, the guests lingered longer over coffee than over dessert. Mr. Drury, the host, asked for a second pot for the table. It was provided. They left satisfied. Tips were generous." "You are certain this pot is from the Bordeaux room?" Wolfe said. "Not a twin. The crest placement is off by a hair on the duplicate. I know our silver like I know the edges of my own knives." She paused. "And the missing screw, Chef Marco has been meaning to replace it for weeks." "That's 2 certainties, not 1, Wolfe murmured. "Very well. Why me?" She touched the card with a gloved fingertip. "Because the note says you. Because Rusterman's was Mr. Vuksic's house and you were his friend. Because if someone is using our name and your name to ruin a room and a reputation, I didn't know what else to do but bring you the insult." "You presume ruin," Wolfe said, dry as chalk, "from a singed pot." She met him level. "We sell belief as much as we sell food. If this is a warning, it's aimed to poison belief." Her mouth tightened. "Mr. Wolfe, if you say no, I'll apologize and take that disgrace out of your house." "Pfui," he said without heat. "Don't be maudlin. You are correct to come." His eyelids lowered. "Archie, the card, the envelope, carefully." Fritz will have a rubber mat in the kitchen. We will not contaminate further what has already been mauled. I bagged the card and the envelope in a pair of document sleeves we keep handy because New York is generous with crimes. Then carried the pot to the kitchen. Fritz appeared from nowhere with the mat and a face that asked 20 questions and allowed none of them. I set the pot down, told him to touch nothing but air, and went back. Wolfe's eyes were closed, which is not a sign of sleep, but of concentration. "Miss Reiter," he said, who had uninterrupted access to the Bordeaux room and its sideboard between 5 and 9. Names. She didn't have to think. "Myself, Chef Marco, Sommelier Forte. 2 waiters, Luis and Garth, assigned to the room. Mr. Drury's assistant, briefly, at 7 to check seating, and the porter for a moment to adjust the heat, and the pantry where the duplicate pot lived. Pantry is overseen by Masha, the pastry lead, and 2 prep cooks on rotation. 7, perhaps 9. That will do. You understand, I will not go to Rustermann's. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. If you wish my help, you will bring to me what I require, or suffer my man to fetch it." "I understand." Her hands were steady now. "What do you require?" "For the moment," Wolfe said, opening his eyes. "The names you have not yet given me. The second waiter's surname, the porters, the prep cooks. A copy of the evening's seating chart, the check totals, and Mr. Drury's full name, occupation, and why he drinks Bordeaux with beef. Archie will attend to the rest." "Attend how?" I asked. "By ascertaining," he said, "which of our 9 is acquainted with bitterness." He curled a finger at the card sleeve on the desk, and by finding the press that printed this without being asked to remember it. He looked at Miss Reiter again. "You may go home if you can. If you cannot, sit there until you can. Archie will see you to a car in 20 minutes. He closed his eyes again. The house felt the way it does when a storm decides to circle instead of pass. Quiet, taut, listening. The pot on the rubber mat down the hall had stopped smelling. Or maybe I'd just gotten used to it. In 20 minutes I had what I needed on paper. Miss Reiter's memory fetched surnames as neatly as a waiter slipping a check onto linen. Luis Vega, Garth Ellison, Porter Klein, prep cooks Miro and Jessup. Drury with a first name of Spence and an investment firm that sounded like something you'd use to prop up a short wall. Cairn Capital. She added 2 numbers. One for the restaurant's night manager. One for Chef Marco, with a caution that Marco's phone answered like an insult if you woke him before dawn. I walked her to the curb and found her a cab. She went into it with the poise of someone who had made a decision and would stick with it until it broke. Back upstairs, I phoned the Gazette and got Lon Cohen, who is a treasure you can't insure. He grunted like a man whose evening had been productive in the ways that produce ulcers. I gave him Drury Spence Cairn Bordeaux and got a pause while he rummaged through his head. "Spence Drury, yes," he said. "Bought and parted out a software firm last year, made enemies who now drink at cost. Has a taste for publicity only when it looks like discretion. He's been smoothing 2 rivals into one cake for months. Why? I want to know why he drinks Bordeaux with beef," I said, "and who would want a sour as aftertaste. Also any gossip that ties him to Rustermann's regulars. You don't ask much." He made a sound that might have been a laugh if he'd had more oxygen. "I'll comb the ticker tape." "Tomorrow. Tonight," I said. "I'll settle for a sniff." "The sniff?" "Drury's got a counsel, Urquhart, who bites his nails and other people. The rivals are Brownlow and Tress. Brownlow's a saint in public and a thug in private. Tress is the reverse. Don't quote me. Drury likes to keep them balanced over the same abyss and sell tickets. That dinner would be him tightening a knot. Bordeaux would be for the label, not the palate. He wants people to see him drink money." He yawned. "That's all you get till I pull files." It was enough to justify putting on a hat. I told Wolfe I'd be at Rustermann's, and he raised his eyelids long enough to say, "Your eyes, Archie." Look for where commendable routines were compromised with no immediate utility. That's the sort of thing that seems helpful until you try to use it. But it had the right angle. Somebody had bent a habit without profit, which usually means profit later. On Madison, close enough to walk, Rusterman's looks the same by night as by day if you don't count the reflections. The night manager, a tall reed named Ira with good shoulders and worse patience, opened for me after I introduced myself as an insult he'd just have to swallow. The dining rooms were stripped and polished. The mirrors had acquired their usual moonlight. The Bordeaux room was a pocket theatre with velvet chairs and a sideboard that had never before confessed. Ira unlocked it, and I studied the slots for silver. The pot space was empty. The duplicate in the pantry, I made him fetch it, sat in my hands a shade lighter and newer, and sure enough, the crest was half a hair north. If Evelyn had invented that difference, she had a future in pathology. "Who's still here?" I asked. "Masha," he said. "She decorates sugar like it insulted her mother." "And Klein. He does floors and glowers. Everyone else is gone." Marco screamed them out at 10. I found Masha in the pastry nook behind a partition like a confessional screen, painting a mirror glaze on a cake that would be consumed in 8 forkfuls. She was small and square, with hair in a kerchief and eyes that saw exactly as much as she meant them to. When I asked about the pantry pot, she didn't look up. "If you breathe on my glaze, I will cut your breath," she said. Then, as a lagniappe, pot stayed in its place until 8. Garth took it out. He said second coffee. I told him to leave it for the pantry. He smiled like a floorboard and took it anyway. Second coffee went to the table at 8:30, I said. "Who told you 8? She shrugged. "Clocks argue." Garth doesn't. She flicked her brush. "Also, the pantry was reorganized yesterday. Not by me. Reorganized was one of Wolfe's favorite filthy words." "By who?" "Nero made a new system with Jessup. He said somebody complained." She set the brush down and finally looked at me. "When I came in this morning, the nut pastes were behind flowers and the sugar scales had been moved 2 steps. It is nothing if you know it. If you don't, you curse twice." That fit the shape of a hand that intended to fumble someone later. I thanked her and went to find Klein, who was dealing red tiles to the kitchen floor with a mop. He was a broad-shouldered angle with a jaw that said he'd tried patience once and it hadn't stuck. "Who knocked the pantry around?" I asked him. "Not me," he said. "If I move something, it's because it fell." "Did you see anybody near the Bordeaux sideboard between 5 and 7? He puffed air. "Everybody. You want prints? Get a ghost." I saw Chef twice, Louise Moore, and that assistant of Drury's, girl with a binder and a dress that didn't belong in a kitchen. She opened the sideboard like it was hers. "Why?" "Because people like to touch what they think they own," he said, which was either a philosophy he kept in his pocket or a sentence he'd rehearsed. She looked in, looked out, wrote on a paper. Then she went to the window and called somebody "that was a string." I had Ira bring me the seating chart, handwritten with the kind of care that tells you errors get spanked. Drury at the head, counsel on his right, Brownlow and Tress separated by people whose names would only matter later if they insisted. A note in the margin. "Coffee, after lamb, second pot if requested." "Where's Garth now?" I asked. "Home," Ira said. "He bikes." "Call him. If he refuses to come, tell him Archie Goodwin will be biking to his door." Garth came with a face like a sneer that had been taught manners. He recognized me the way people recognize a streetlight that spoils their shadows. He admitted to taking the pantry pot, carrying it into the Bordeaux room, never setting it down because Mr. Drury's assistant, name of Lydia Vance, intercepted him and told him the client preferred French press for the second round, which they had provided from a carafe they'd brought. "You let a guest bring coffee into Rusterman's?" Ira barked. Garth didn't flinch. "She said it was the client's ritual. She had permission from Mr. Drury at booking. She had a compact press set in a leather case. I poured hot water from the kettle, watched bloom, counted seconds like a sinner, and served. That was a compromise of a commendable routine for no immediate utility. I thanked the kid and sent him home, because I wanted the shape of the thing to keep its outline intact. Then I phoned Wolfe from the payphone near the cloak. He answered on the first ring, which he only does when he's thinking. They brought their own press, I said. Second coffee was not ours. Pantry was reorganized yesterday by the prep pair, allegedly for efficiency. Drury's assistant had her fingers in the sideboard. He said, which from Wolfe is a brass band. Archie, bring me Masha's description in her words, the names of the press manufacturer, if Garth saw it, and a list of every print shop within 8 blocks that can do raised type on cream stock without outsourcing. Tomorrow we will ask which of our people acquired a taste for bitterness last week and why they wished Rustamans to remember it tonight. Masha gave me her words as if she were piping them onto a cake. If you breathe on my glaze, I will cut your breath. The pantry was reorganized yesterday, not by me. The nut pastes behind flowers, the sugar scales moved 2 steps. It is nothing if you know it. If you don't, you curse twice. I wrote it down verbatim, with a note that her eyes made the word reorganized sound like a crime with priors. Garth, pressed for brand, settled on a German-looking thing, steel, not glass. The case smelled like good leather. The stamp on the bottom was an F, like a script F. I coaxed him into Freeling, which he liked once he'd said it. From Ira, I lifted the names and hours of the nearby printers, and on my way out, I loitered in front of 2 shop windows long enough to see cream stock with raised type in their displays. They shut at 6. People who make nice things for other people to touch go home early. The walk back took 10 minutes and 2 thoughts. One, that the French press routine was a deliberate slap in a house that measured water by the gram and time by a stopwatch. 2, that the slap hadn't been about taste at all. You don't rearrange a pantry to make better coffee. You rearrange it so that in a particular minute, someone you want to fumble will fumble on cue. The brownstone's front door accepted my key like an old friend with standards. Inside, the air had the calm that comes when a house knows its owner is awake and coiled. I went straight to the office. Wolfe had not changed position. The card and envelope sat where I'd left them, and his gaze ticked to my notebook and stayed there. Freeling, I said. Leather case. Client ritual. Masha's wording. I handed it over. And 2 printers on Park that could have printed that card in their sleep. Hours constrain. We'll have to ask for sins committed yesterday or earlier. He flicked a finger at the notebook, which in Wolfe means approval, graded B. Fritz. Asleep or pretending? I said. The part? In the kitchen, he said. On the rubber. I have not touched it. I have, however, considered it. Coffee is bitter by nature. To make a point with bitterness, you either make it unbearably so, or you subtract sweetness somewhere it's expected, I finished. Rustamans doesn't sweeten with sugar in the cup. They sweeten by ending a night on a certainty. Somebody stole the certainty. That, he murmured, is not contemptible as methods go. Be good and look again. I went to the kitchen. The light was on. Fritz would not leave a light on unless the light intended to be useful. The pot sat where I'd left it, on the rubber mat, lid askew by a hair. I had the gloves in my pocket and put them on. The hinge looked the same, with the absence that catches the eye, the tiny missing screw. Only now the hinge's edge had a fresh, bright nick, metal naked under soot, as if a tool had slipped. I hadn't seen that earlier. And I'd looked. The mat had a faint new crescent of soot that didn't match the old pattern. I bent close. Something had been touched, just not by Fritz. The back stair door had its bolt slid, but the chain was lying straight along the jamb, not drooped as it would be if you set it and forgot it. That could be a nervous system looking for ghosts, or it could be a hand that had done one thing and not the other in a hurry. I went back, told Wolfe, and got a slow blink that meant he had already suspected me into that discovery. "Check the spout," he said. I did. Inside the mouth, where no sane person cleans more than rarely, there was a grit that caught the light. I asked for tweezers, and he told me where Fritz kept them. Under the magnifier lamp on the kitchen wall, I placed a fleck the size of a dull pinhead. It was dark, crumbly, with a sheen that wasn't coffee. I crushed a bragging molecule between gloved fingertips and leaned close. The odor jumped. Char, yes, and a brassy bitterness that snapped at the tongue from memory alone. Wolfe's voice carried in from the doorway. He had not come in, but sound travels for him when he wants it to. "Well, not grounds," I said. "Something that burned and wanted you to know it. Not poison. If it were, the smell wouldn't be trying to audition." I hesitated. There's an old bar trick with quinine to make bitterness ring, but this has a different pitch. He grunted. "You have a better palate than you deserve, but not good enough for this. We will not taste." "The trespass, Archie." "Somebody's been in," I said. "Quick and careful." They tried the hinge, maybe to fix the missing screw, maybe to lift the lid without smearing. They didn't find what they wanted, or they took it and left a fresh nick doing it. "And left the light on," he said. "Fritz would not." I stood there with the tweezers, feeling the brownstone take a small breath and hold it. "Miss Reiter?" "No," he said. "She lacks the nerve to come back and the wit to think of it." "You?" "Thanks," I said. "If I were going to frame my boss, I'd do it at least with a different pot." "Then someone else." They were looking for an inclusion that you hadn't seen, or they were confirming that you had. In either case, the point is the card. I was to be made to look, and now I'm looking. He let the air settle. "Put the fleck in a pillbox from the drawer, label it, and remedy the chain." I did the chores. When I came back, he had his eyes closed and his head tilted, a lazy pelican in thought. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will find Miss Lydia Vance and observe her hands while she speaks. Before that, you will see which printer sells that stock to clients who like anonymity, and you will ask at Freeling's distributor which retailers sold a compact press and a custom leather case this month, within a mile of Rusty Mann's." He opened his eyes. "But first, call Mr. Cohen again. Request a taste of Drury's counsel, Urquhart, and whether Miss Vance works only for Drury or for whoever pays to loosen Brownlow and Tress." It was after midnight, but Lon keeps a line open for trouble he can put on paper later. He gave me a weary snort and then a tidbit. Urquhart's firm had a client list with more variety than a deli counter, and Lydia Vance had hopped firms 3 times in 2 years, always landing next to a man who liked to knit enemies. No home address yet. I told him to sleep and promised a bribe. When I hung up, Wolfe reached to the card without touching it. "Ask Nero Wolfe how bitter tastes," he repeated. "Mild. He knows." "It tastes like a habit interrupted." He let his hand fall. "Go to bed, Archie. Bolt the chain thoroughly this time. In the morning we will return Rusterman's certainty to it by taking someone else's away." At 9, the brownstone resumed the set program. Fritz's breakfast precision, my coffee at a legal hour. Wolfe vanishing upstairs to commune with plants and return at 11 smelling faintly of bark and triumph. I used the gap for a circle on foot. Printers first, then the metal that makes coffee do tricks, then the woman who had her fingers in Rusterman's service, like wires in a piano. Caprice Press on Park had the right look. A front window that sold taste without shouting, a bell that tinkled rather than rang. The manager, a fellow named Creel with a part in his hair sharp enough to slice cardboard, listened to my description and took his time nodding. Raised cream stock with a blind emboss? Yes, they could, and did. I showed him the envelope through the sleeve, and he recognized the cut and the watermark, but not the piece. He leaned in when I quoted the phrase on the card. "That line," he said, "is a little too well spaced to have been cast by a dilettante. It reads like someone who was ordered before he wasn't coy." He went to a ledger and flipped. "Yesterday afternoon, rush job, 10 cards, 1 line, paid cash. A woman, mid-30s, dark hair in a twist, quick, exacting. Gave a name. L. Vance." He looked up over his glasses. "We don't require IDs for calling cards with nonsense on them." "Did she leave anything else?" I asked. "Only an impression," he said. She proofed the spacing with a ruler while talking into a phone about seating arrangements. "She has the kind of hands that don't smudge." I thanked him with more warmth than he deserved for selling me a coincidence that leaned too hard and marked that pound of flesh for Wolfe's later carving. 2 blocks down, a smaller shop with older machines confirmed the same order had not come from them and suggested that anyone wanting that exact decal would go to Creel first. That made a nice straight line. For the press, the distributor's Midtown office bounced me to a retail cellar on Madison that specialized in handsome things for people who like to grind their kitchens by hand. The clerk wore an apron and an expression that had learned the art of noticing only what his commission required. Freeling compact press? Yes. Leather traveling case? Yes. Custom in black with a stitched pocket for a timer. 2 had been sold last week. 1 cash, 1 on a corporate card. Which corporate card? He checked, then politely positioned his body to block my view of the screen. I was prepared to introduce him to the idea of sharing when he sighed, decided I would be persistent without being profitable, and said the name like a sin he didn't confess to. Cairn Capital. On the sidewalk, I phoned Wolfe and gave him the line. "Vance bought the cards yesterday. Drury's firm bought the press last week." He grunted at intervals that I could translate. "Observe the lady," he said. "Then bring me, if you can, a look at that case." He hung up because he enjoys economy. Drury's people worked out of a glass and light office near Bryant Park. The receptionist asked me to sit in a chair that made a man feel both important and observed. Lydia Vance came out after 6 minutes, which means either she was free or she knew how to make people feel chosen. She had the dark hair and the twist, the hands were as advertised. Short nails, clean edges, a small nick at the side of the thumb that was healing in a hurry. You don't get that from a paper cut. You get it from hot metal or a kettle lid that fights back. "I'm Archie Goodwin," I told her. "I collect facts for a man who eats them. You were at Rusterman's last night with Mr. Drury. He likes to drink labels. You like to count seconds." She didn't blink. "Mr. Drury appreciates precision. I comply. You also appreciate letterpress," I said. "Less forgiving than a laser, more satisfying. You had cause to order 10 cards in a hurry yesterday with a line meant to amuse you." "Did it?" She looked at my face as if it were a document she had to redact. "I ordered place cards," she said. "If someone printed jokes for you, I hope you enjoyed them. As for seconds, yes. Coffee blooms. I count because I have a watch on the hand with the nick," I said. "From the kettle or the press?" She smiled then, and it was the kind of smile that puts salt on a cut. "From living." She moved the conversation neatly. "Mr. Goodwin, is there an allegation I should root to counsel?" "Not from me," I said. "I'm collecting tastes." "You brought your own press to Rusterman's. That's a slap. Why compel it?" "Preference isn't compulsion," she said. "Rusterman's coffee is excellent. Mr. Drury prefers a different grind. The house permitted it in the booking. If their pantry felt intruded upon, they may invoice us for the offense." I let it sit. Her bag was on her arm, a structured thing in black with a depth that could hide 1,000 sins or a compact press. I didn't ask to see it. I did take her in and stored the data, the way she stood with weight on the balls of her feet, ready to turn, the way her eyes clocked exits. The small smudge of soot at the base of her right index finger that she thought she'd rubbed away, but hadn't. She wasn't careless. She'd overestimated the distance between last night and this morning. "Which print shop do you like?" I asked. "Whichever meets the deadline," she said. "And Mr. Goodwin, if you intend to watch me, stand where the light is kind. It flatters us both." She gave me a card with her work number and left me to admire the typography. Clean, not Caprice's stock, but done by someone who'd learned on older machines. I phoned Wolfe from the lobby. "She's neat," I said. "Very. Bought the cards, likely bought the press, and lies as if it's a blade she sharpens daily. There's a fresh nick on her thumb and a ghost of soot on her finger. She doesn't deny. She reframes. "Does she taste of bitterness?" he asked. "She tastes of control," I said. "Bitterness may be the spice." "Come home," he said. "We have received a garnish." When I got there, Fritz met me in the hall with his lips pressed tight and a tray in his hands like a tribunal. On it lay a small twist of waxed paper. Wolfe had opened it with tongs because he believes in ceremony for pollutants. Inside was a screw, tiny, bright, the twin of one gone missing from a hinge. "It had been left in our vestibule," he said, "wrapped and set on the inner mat as if returned by a considerate thief." The paper carried the faint print of a stamp from a hardware store on 3rd Avenue. Wolfe, in his chair, had the card and the screw arranged as if they were the subject and verb of a sentence he intended to diagram. "We have been corrected," he said. "Someone thinks us slow. They invite us to replace what they removed." He looked at me. "We will oblige by replacing it with something else." "A reason?" "Saul Panzer will now be useful. Call him. Ask him to shadow Miss Vance's bag and Mr. Klein's hands. One of them has been arranging rooms and routines. Both will offend again if we let them." He closed his eyes briefly. "And Archie, bring me a cup of coffee. Bitter. We will remind our visitor what flavor invites remedy." Fritz brewed it black and mean and set the cup where Wolfe could ignore it until it had cooled to the precise temperature of disdain. I phoned Saul, who answered the way Saul answers, as if his ear had been waiting for my voice and would go back to reading a train schedule when I stopped talking. I gave him the cast list, Lydia Vance, Porter Klein, and the props. Compact press in a leather case, a screw born for a hinge, a pantry that had been taught bad habits. He didn't ask why the screw mattered. Saul operates on the theory that if Wolfe wants a screw, the city's threads depend on it. "Bag or hands first?" he said. "Bag," I told him. "She carries her work like a weapon. Klein's hands will be where floors are. If he goes off his route, note it. If he buys anything smaller than an aspirin, I want the label." Wolfe sipped, closed his eyes, and grimaced as if memory were a flavor he didn't prefer to revisit. "Good," he said. "Archie, the hardware store that stamped our providential parcel, go ask which supplicant begged for that screw and when." I took the vestibule paper with me, just the stamped edge because the rest offended, and headed to 3rd Avenue. The place was a long, narrow temple to bolt and thread, and the clerk had a face worn smooth by small requests and large complaints. When I laid the stamp on the counter, he nodded as if I'd shown him a yearbook photo of himself. "Yesterday?" I asked. "Tiny hinge screw, metric, slotted head, and a driver to bully it." He squinted, replaying the day. "Mid-afternoon. A lady, efficient. She had the twin in a tissue and asked for 2.5 millimeters, 2-millimeter thread, slotted, stainless. Wanted 8, took 12. Paid cash. Also bought a stubby jeweler's driver, hands like she doesn't miss. You don't forget a customer who knows more numbers than you do. Dark hair in a twist." He shrugged. "Hair was tidy." She was in a hurry, but not flustered. The hurry was in her feet, not her hands. That gave the screw a timetable, procured before the dinner, which meant the removal wasn't improvisation. Someone had decided ahead of time to mar the pot and then to make a point by returning the capacity to mend. I phoned Wolfe with the timestamp, and his "ha" came across the wire like a gavel on felt. "Premeditation," he said. "That places the modification at Rusterman's before coffee was served. And the card, ordered yesterday, confirms that the insult was to be made with deliberation, not pique. Go to Drury's counsel. Number, leave him in his burrow. Find Miss Vance again? Number, Sol will. Return here. On the way back, my phone buzzed. Ira from Rusterman's had found a new way to use my name, like a curse for dodging. We just received 2 calls, he said. One from a blogger with a palette and a megaphone asking whether Rusterman's has switched to campfire chic coffee. Another from a stringer wanting a quote on a feud with Nero Wolfe. He made a sound like a cork pulled without ceremony. Someone sent them a photograph of our Bordeaux pot blackened, with that phrase about bitterness stamped on the image. "Angle looks like our sideboard. Was that pot ever photographed at the restaurant?" I asked. "Not by us," he snapped. "We shoot food, not our sins. The sideboard is visible in the image behind the pot. The light looks like last night, not today. That's synced with the trespass in my kitchen and the returned screw. Our visitor liked to stage scenes and send postcards. I told Ira to stall with no comment until he was numb and rang off before he could teach me new adjectives. Sol called next. "Your lady just left the office," he said. "Bag on her arm. Pace steady." She walked to a parcel locker on 40th. She opened a cubby with a code, swapped a flat envelope for a small case-sized item, then continued east. She met no one. She doesn't jaywalk. She's precise even when nobody's grading. "The case," I said. "Dimensions fit the Freeling," he said. "Black leather, stitched, a scuff on the corner." She didn't linger. She does this often. "Follow the envelope," I said, because hope is a habit. Sol did it with his usual indifference to hope and talent for results. "The locker feed went to a courier 5 minutes later," he said. I bounced to the courier, legal I'm sure, and watched the envelope divert to a co-working space near Lexington. Recipient, Cyclamen LLC. The office has 2 chairs and a printer. I can keep threading, but the thread is tangled on purpose. "Cut yourself a piece," I told him, "and label it for later. Keep on her." Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the hardware clerk's recital, Ira's panic, and Sol's locker ballet. He arranged the screw in the card and the facts as if they were parsley he would strip from his plate but wanted to admire first. "We have," he said, "a person who offends in layers. The first, she alters the pantry to induce error. The second, she imports a press and ritual as sanctioned insult. The third, she disfigures a symbol of the house that she intends will be seen here." He tapped the card. "The fourth, she broadcasts the spectacle with my name affixed to the tag, so that Rusterman's must answer to me, and I must answer to Rusterman's." "Why?" I asked. "If Drury wants leverage over Brownlow and Tress, a sideshow with coffee doesn't buy him stock." "Drury is not my concern," he said. "Miss Vance is an instrument." "Who holds the handle?" He closed his eyes. "Evelyn Reiter is the obvious sufferer. The house's reputation, but an instrument is seldom forged for the obvious. Someone wants me to draw my attention to Rusterman's and, in drawing it, to expose a separate fault." Before I could ask what fault, the bell rang. Not the door. Our bell, the line that Sol uses when he doesn't wish to talk. Wolfe nodded, and I picked up. Sol's voice was a quiet footstep. "Your porter," he said. "Klein. He's off schedule and off route. He just went into the same hardware store you visited and came out with a packet of shims and a magnet on a telescoping wand. He's carrying his hands like he's thinking with them. He's headed south, not home." Wolfe's eyes came open, bright. "Archie." I'm on him, I said. Do not crowd, he said. Observe what he retrieves with a magnet. He would not buy it without a target. Saul kept the loose tail, and I picked up the second line. We triangulated Klein down to a service alley behind a building that housed 3 respectable things and one that pretended. He stopped behind a dumpster, extended the wand, and slid it into a narrow seam between metal and wall that had eaten more than its share of screws and coins. The wand came out with a small glitter and a smear of soot. He palmed the find and pocketed it, then continued on as if he had been told to walk until suspicion stopped looking. I reported, and Wolfe didn't say ha this time. He said, "The Hinge's missing member was not alone. Our visitor cached debris around the city as if she was salting a walk for you. We will invite them all to my office, Archie. All the hands that touched the room, Miss Reiter, Chef Marco, Masha, the waiters, Klein, and Miss Vance. But not yet. First, we will return an insult. How? I asked. By restoring certainty where it was stolen, he said. Call Rustermans. Inform Ira that this evening, coffee service in the Bordeaux room will be performed by Mr. Fritz Brenner of West 35th Street, under my direction, and inform Miss Vance through Saul that if she intends to bring a press, she may bring it to my house at 7. She will not be able to resist. He lifted the cup again and let the bitterness sit on his tongue long enough to memorize it. We will serve her a taste she does not prefer. Consequence. Fritz didn't blink at the decree. He ironed a clean towel as if it were a flag and started making notes on grind, dose, and water profile the way a conductor marks a score. I phoned Ira and got sputter, then awe, then a nervous assent that he'd tried to wrap in professionalism. I told him the only condition was obedience. He said the Bordeaux room would be ready and that he would personally frisk any bag that winked at a kettle. Wolfe added a garnish. If the blogger called again, Ira was to say that Rustermans had always served coffee properly and would prove it tonight. You could hear him stand straighter. Saul checked in thrice with nothing theatrical to report, which in Saul's lexicon means he was earning his keep. Miss Vance ate a salad with the care of a person who likes to win at everything and then took a car toward the park. Klein returned to his burro and kept his hands where groceries belong. At 6:30, I put myself in the hallway to greet our guest with the polish of a man who is about to enjoy someone else's confidence. She was on time. The press case on her arm might have been a violin if you didn't know how coffee sings. She had changed her blouse and washed the soot away. The nick on her thumb had progressed from pink to pale. When I opened the door, she gave me the same courteous appraisal as yesterday, with a pinch more interest. Mr. Wolfe has a rule about people who bring devices into his house, I said, taking her coat. He likes them if they are necessary. Then I'm fortunate, she said. Precision is always necessary. I let that sit and led her to the office. Wolfe did not rise, which he reserves for births, weddings, and the rare day when he is fooled. He gave her a look that would have deflated hubris if hubris had any air to spare. She took the red leather chair with the assurance of someone who knows where the power outlets are. You asked me to bring my press, she said. I assume we will brew to your standard, then to mine, and write constitutions afterward. I do not drink constitutions, Wolfe said. You will assemble your instrument on that tray, under Archie's eye. You will not touch anything on this desk or in this room that is not the tray. If that is agreeable, we will continue. She responded to the dictation without a wince. The case snapped open with the sound of habit. She drew the compact press, the filter, the folding kettle, no heat, of course. Fritz provided, and the timer with its smug face. Her hands were steady, economical, and, this was for Wolfe, free of ornament. No ring, no bracelet to catch metal filings, no watch today to hide a nick. I watched the angles and the reach. Wolfe watched her not watching him. Fritz came in with the other half of the equation. 2 small carafes, one labeled house, one labeled press, 2 cups of porcelain so thin you worried about your breath. Scales, thermometer, the kit he uses when a night matters. He glanced once at Lydia's setup and allowed himself the fractional lift of an eyebrow, the chef's nod to a tool that can do work. Then he looked to Wolfe. Wolfe inclined his head, and Fritz began. We ran their recipe first. It produced a clean, muscular cup that would have impressed a boardroom and bored a monk. She raised hers, inhaled, and waited. Wolfe sipped, set it down, and permitted a grunt that indicated drinkability. Then Fritz brewed his. Rusterman's grind, Rusterman's thyme, a bloom like a peony, bitters tamed by sweetness the bean carries when you don't bully it. There was a pause when she lifted it. Even her eyes had to remark the difference. She schooled them, but that tiny recalculation on her mouth corner paid for half my day. Preference, she said after a beat, is a democracy of one. And sabotage, Wolfe said, is not preference. Miss Vance, yesterday you altered routines at Rusterman's by altering the pantry. You imported a device and a ritual to usurp a house's certainty. You arranged, with a hardware store's aid, to remove a screw from a hinge, blacken a symbol, and deliver it to my door with an invitation clumsily disguised as a jeer. Today, you returned the screw. You intended that I should see a shape and miss a hand. If you have a claim, she said, very calm, advance it. If you are rehearsing, I'll come back when the audience is seated. You're not my audience, he said. You're someone's instrument. Whoever paid Cyclamen LLC for its locker and printer, whoever bought a French press on a corporate card, whoever thought bitterness would force me to choose between Rusterman's and myself, all that puppet work is clever, but the hand that moves you is not as clever as it supposes. I let my face stay neutral. She did too, but the breath she took was a notch deeper. You're welcome to keep your theories, she said. They pour well. Wolfe didn't bother to spar. He shifted the topic as neatly as a man moving a knight to check a queen. When you picked up the parcel at the locker, he said, you exchanged it for an item approximately 9 by 5 by 3 inches. What is in it now? She didn't flinch. Documents, she said. I carry work. You follow women with bags. Charming. You carry habits, Wolfe said. Your habit last night was to stage the second coffee as a spectacle you could control in the room and then to prearrange the afterpiece as a spectacle you could control online. Your accomplice here, he flicked a glance at me and I nodded, retrieved a magnet today. You used one yesterday in a different alley to gather the screws you salted. You wanted me to believe clumsiness. You left me competence. Why? To get you here, she said, crisp now. Seems it worked. Why me? He asked, still mild. Mr. Drury's enemies would taste the same coffee if you served them in Hoboken. She leaned back. Because you're the only palate that matters. If Rusterman's is said to have quarreled with Nero Wolfe, it is said to have quarreled with its own certainty. The story writes itself. There, Wolfe said, and his eyelids dipped, satisfied. You do care about the story. Not for Drury, who lives on stories, but for someone who needs this house and that house to be seen at odds. Who in the circle would profit from Rusterman's certainty questioned, my attention held, and a dinner's aftermath trending. Not Chef Marco, he suffers, not Miss Writer. She bleeds, not the waiters. They are wages. Mr. Klein's magnet tells me he is sent to tidy your leavings, not to create them. That leaves the diners. I gave him Drury Brownlow Tress as a receipt. He nodded. Mr. Brownlow has built a public decency that cannot abide scandal, but will eat it in private, he said. Mr. Tress has a private decency that can withstand being publicly painted loud, and hates it. Both would prefer Rusterman's to be a sanctuary untouched by theatre. Drury sells theatre. Miss Vance stages it. And yet, he let the "and yet" hang like a chandelier. Mr. Urquhart, the counsel, has clients beyond Drury. He has a gossip pipeline and an appetite. Miss Vance has hopped from men who knit enemies to men who knit enemies because she is good with needles. The handle on the instrument may be in Urquhart's hand, not Drury's. Her face didn't change, but the pulse in her throat ticked once. Saul, Wolfe said to the air, and Saul, who had been in the hall long enough to memorize her footsteps, entered without fanfare. He put a phone on the desk with a photograph on the screen. Urquhart at a bar last week with a blogger whose palette comes with a megaphone. Another photo, the same blogger today, receiving a message captioned with our bitter line and a shot framed from the Bordeaux sideboard. Saul's voice was as flat as a docket. The sender traces to Cyclamen. The admin on Cyclamen traces to a shell Urquhart's firm uses for overflow communications. Wolfe's gaze returned to her. "You are nimble," he said. "You arranged the insult. Your employer of the week arranged the echo. Both of you presumed that I would either defend Rustermans and bluster or ignore it and cede the narrative. I will do neither." She took a breath and let it out slow. "What will you do?" "I will restore Rusterman's certainty at 8 o'clock with a service so impeccable that your story chokes on it," he said. "And at 9, I will assemble those whose hands touch the room in this office. You will sit there again. I will ask questions that do not flatter. You and Mr. Urquhart will answer them, or find yourselves answering to others who have less patience and more badges." She set her cup down, unstained. "You're promising a performance." "I am promising sequence," he said. "First correction, then consequence." She stood. "Then I'll see you at 9. After she left, the air shifted back to the house's own temperature. Wolfe looked at the screw, the card, the cups, and the tray. "Archie," he said, "go with Fritz. Watch for any hand that trembles when certainty is restored. And keep Saul where he can hear Urquhart breathe." "Anything else?" I asked. "Yes. Bring back the blogger's palette if he shows up to sneer," he said. "We will offer him an education. Bitterness in the right mouth becomes wit." He closed his eyes, satisfied not because the thing was done, but because it had accepted the route he intended to use to end it. Fritz doesn't travel light when he travels at all. He packed as if for a duel. Small scale, thermometer, kettle calibrated to Wolfe's preferred sulk, 2 cloth filters seasoned in quiet, beans he'd roasted yesterday and sealed like state secrets. I carried the case and the attitude, which you can't buy retail. Rusterman's Bordeaux room had the hush of a theatre 5 minutes before curtain. Ira met us with gratitude disguised as stiffness and a table set on one side where Fritz could operate without making the guests feel they were on tour at a factory. We got there 10 minutes before 8. Marcia stood in the doorway, arms folded, looking like a saint for a difficult parish. Klein loitered 2 rooms away, pretending to consult a janitor's schedule with the intensity of a man reading scripture. The waiters, Louis and Garth, kept their hands where menu covers could see them. Chef Marco stuck his head in, glared at the hot water as if daring it to be impure, then retreated to the range. It was a cast prepared to be watched. The blogger arrived first, with a camera that could shame a bear and a grin he used like a microphone. I intercepted him, flashed him my card, and told him that anyone who took a photograph before coffee was served would find himself drinking his lens cap through a straw. He blinked, recalculated, and decided to play along. "I'm here to taste," he said. "The internet wants a feud." "Then tell the internet to order a side of patience," I said. "You'll get a pour and a comment. If you try for theatre, you'll get escorted to Lexington Avenue to review hot dog carts that set the fence." The diners came next. Drury wore satisfaction like a boutonniere. Urquhart came without his nails, clean for once, in a suit that cost the same as a used car and fit him like a resume. Brownlow and Tress brought faces composed to contradict each other. Lydia Vance entered last, with the same black case and no flutter. She saw Fritz's station and added one molecule of amusement to her air. Fritz did not look at her. He measured, ground, and let the bloom stand like a held breath. His hands don't tremble because they've never been introduced to doubt. The room stilled, not with reverence, but with that animal hush that descends when a pack waits for the alpha to twitch. I took the blogger by the elbow and guided him to a vantage point where he could see but not spoil, and caught a glimpse of Klein in the mirror, watching the table with eyes that understood residue. When Fritz poured, he did it without flourish. The fragrance had consequence. Even the blogger lowered his camera and simply smelled. Drury raised his cup, swallowed, and gave a nod that admitted competence against his will. Brownlow permitted pleasure. Tress's shoulders eased. Urquhart set his cup down, considered it as if it had offered him a defense he hadn't asked for, and let a small smile out for exercise. Lydia sipped last. Her gaze didn't shift, but the tiny muscle near her eye did. You wouldn't call it a tremble, not without a microscope, but it was a tick that would have rung bells in a quieter house. I filed it where Wolfe likes such things kept, accessible and ready. Garth went to fetch the second pour on cue, but I touched his sleeve and shook my head. No encore, I said. Tonight we end on a certainty. He got it and backed off. Lydia's case stayed closed. She didn't press a press into the room Wolfe had repaired. She watched Fritz instead, as if noting how certainty holds a kettle. The blogger took notes, asked 2 intelligent questions that surprised him coming out of his own mouth, and accepted a single quote from me. Rusterman's coffee is not a beverage, it's an exit line. He grinned like a man who'd been handed a headline and knew it. He didn't try for a shot of the sideboard. Urquhart caught me watching him watch Lydia and returned a look as bland as fresh snow. After service, I did a small circuit. Masha's jaw unclenched by a degree. Louise handled cups as if they were votive offerings. Klein stayed put. The wand in his pocket made a shape I could pick out blind now. Before we left, he made a point of gliding past the sideboard to adjust a non-existent skew in a napkin. It was careful theatre. Too careful. If he was merely tidying, he would have moved on without that deliberate pause. He wanted me to see him behave as a man who tidies and nothing else. That eagerness scratched. Fritz, on the other hand, was the picture of professional neutrality. He accepted Ira's gratitude like a physician who has reset a dislocated shoulder and will not discuss the toe. When we reached the sidewalk, he allowed himself one phrase. "It is not bitterness," he said, "that offends. It is the misuse of it." Then he went home to put his tools away, the way a good man puts a day back in its drawer. I called Saul with a summary while we cabbed it. He had a gift for me. The blogger had been texted twice during the meal, both times from a number rented by cyclamen. The first had been a nudge. If Wolfe's man interferes, film it. The second, after Fritz's pour, had read, "Change angle. Praise house, question feud." When the wind shifted, the kite string did too. Urquhart had not texted. His hands stayed above board. Someone in his orbit pulled the toggles. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was already installed for the 9 o'clock inquisition. The room was laid out for a small war, chairs placed not by comfort, but by design, with a red one where the temperature is highest. He listened, eyes half-lidded, while I gave him the play-by-play. When I got to Lydia's micro-tick, his lids lifted a fraction. When I described Klein's napkin pantomime, he nodded. "The compulsion to declare innocence is cousin to confession," he said. "Mr. Klein's wand was purchased to retrieve screws cached by another. His anxiety is not guilt, but association. Miss Vance withheld her ritual when confronted with competence. She is not foolish. She is loyal to the pose, not the act. Mr. Urquhart did not pull his strings alone. He has a partner who knows where to place petty injuries so they swell." "Someone at Rusterman's," I said. "Someone who despises the house enough to rearrange it and admires it enough to know where to hurt it." He let that lie on the air. The doorbell rang. our door, not Saul's wire, and Fritz went to marshal them. They came in order of comfort. Ira trying to be brisk, Chef Marco storming because that's his walk, Masha carrying silence, Luis and Garth like boys to a principal's office, Klein with his hands empty and too visible, and last Evelyn Reiter, whose poise had a new crack at one edge. Lydia followed a minute later, escorted by Saul, and scanned the room as if measuring the available exits and the power supply. Urquhart was on the phone in the hall, talking to someone whose name he didn't say. Saul took his phone away from his ear with one finger and handed it to me. The line was already dead. Wolfe didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He waited until the chairs had accepted their burdens and the room's pulse had aligned with his. "We will be brief," he said. "We will proceed in sequence." Something was taken from Rusterman's last night that is not silver and not coffee. It was certainty. It will be returned now. I want the person who moved the sugar scales 2 steps and put nut pastes behind flowers to tell me why there was no fidget. There was only Masha's eyes sharpening and Klein's jaw clenching and Garth's breath stopping for a beat. Then Evelyn Reiter, who had not looked away from Wolfe since she sat down, lifted her hand. Not high, just enough to be a human being instead of a piece of furniture, and said, very level, "Because I asked them to." The air went brittle. Even Wolfe, who doesn't waste gestures, shifted a half-inch deeper in his chair. Evelyn's hand stayed steady, not raised to the ceiling, but held like a note that couldn't be ignored. "You asked them," Wolfe said, the words unhurried, each one weighed. "Yes," she answered. "The pantry was mine to order. I asked Jessup and Miro to change the layout because Marco's system had grown sloppy. I thought I was correcting, not corrupting." Chef Marco's face darkened to the shade of an unripe plum. "Sloppy," he barked. "That pantry has run 10 years under my eye." 10 years under your eye doesn't make it immune to dust," she said, still calm. "You want someone to have touched the scales and the nut pastes." I did, because the old system wasted time. "That's all. You admit it," Wolfe said, and his lids lowered, almost content. "Convenient." Her gaze moved to him, hard and steady. "Convenient, but true. I came to you last night because I thought someone was twisting Rusterman's into a spectacle. I didn't realize the first twist would be mine, Archie. That is, I watched the others." Garth sat frozen, his fingers curled on his knees like a man rehearsing lines. Luis stared at the carpet as if a pattern would rescue him. Klein's jaw was locked so tight you could have cracked walnuts on it. Masha's face had the serenity of a saint who expects everyone else to fail. Lydia Vance watched Wolfe, not Evelyn, and that was its own note. "You reorganized," Wolfe said, "but you did not scorch silver or deliver postcards. That was not your hand. No." Her chin lifted. "I've never laid a flame to anything but creme brulee." "Then who?" Wolfe murmured. No one answered. That's the trick about silence. It expands, and in Wolfe's office, it multiplies. He let it work. When he finally opened his eyes again, they swung to Klein. "Mr. Klein," he said, "you bought a telescoping magnet this afternoon." "Why?" Klein swallowed, an audible click. "Because screws fall. That's all. They fall behind counters, into grates. I wanted to be ready. You retrieved one from behind a dumpster," Wolfe said. "Not your counter, not your grate." "Why there?" Klein's nostrils flared. "Because someone told me to check. A message." "No name from cyclamen," Wolfe said flatly. The porter blinked, and that gave him away. "I don't know the word," he muttered. "You don't need to," Wolfe said. "The company needed you to serve as its vacuum. You weren't the hand, you were the broom." Klein's eyes flicked, unbidden, to Lydia. She didn't return the look, but the flick was enough. Wolfe caught it, and I didn't miss it either. "Miss Vance," Wolfe said, voice mild as a feather. "Your instrument shows its string. Would you like to deny that you pulled it?" She folded her hands. "If Mr. Klein thinks I wrote him notes, he's mistaken. I don't need magnets to retrieve what I place," "Neatly said," Wolfe acknowledged, "but not sufficient. You planted the screw in my vestibule. That required retrieval from where you had lodged it first. You cannot smirk your way past fingerprints." Urquhart shifted in his chair, finally breaking his counsel's silence. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "if you're accusing my associate—" "I am not," Wolfe cut him off. "Accusing? I am arranging sequence. Your associate is agile, but even she does not spend her own coin for errands that profit someone else. Who benefits if Rustamans appears at odds with me?" Brownlow stirred. "Not I," he said quickly. "Rustamans is one of my sanctuaries." Tress snorted. "Nor me. I don't need you, and I don't need them." "That leaves," Wolfe said, "you, Mr. Urquhart. You traffic in noise. You wanted a spectacle to hang on your stringer's pen. You paid for cyclamen. You directed Miss Vance. You salted the screws for Archie to follow like breadcrumbs." Urquhart's lip twitched, but he kept his voice steady. "That's a picturesque accusation. What would I gain?" "You would gain," Wolfe said, "a lever." Drury balances Brownlow and Tress like weights on a scale. You wished to jolt the beam. If Rustamans seemed compromised, Brownlow and Tress would retreat. Drury would scramble. You would offer solutions. For a price, Vance's fingers flexed once, barely. Urquhart kept his poker face, but his jaw muscle tightened. Evelyn let out a breath she'd been holding. "You fail, though," Wolfe said, almost lazily, "because I am here, and because you presumed I would ignore a scorched pot or indulge a feud. Instead, I have your sequence." Miss Reiter disturbed her pantry. Miss Vance performed her ritual and her insult. Mr. Klein collected crumbs, and you, Mr. Urquhart, paid for the printer, the locker, and the broadcast. "Proof," Urquhart said sharply. Wolfe opened his eyes, full. "Proof is not my duty. Sequence is, and sequence will be handed to those who demand proof. They will find it in Caprice's ledger, in the hardware store's receipts, in Cyclamen's account, in the texts your stringer received. If you believe that trail dissolves, you flatter yourself." The silence that followed wasn't brittle this time. It was heavy, like a sack full of wet cement. Urquhart sat very still. Lydia Vance looked at him at last, just once, with an expression that said she'd played her part, and he hadn't earned it. Wolfe let the weight settle, then said, "Rustaman's certainty is restored. Mine as well. Mr. Urquhart, you may leave, and I recommend you do so without flourish. Miss Vance, you will remain until I decide whether your agility is pardonable. Mr. Klein, you will go back to sweeping floors and refrain from sweeping alleys. Miss Reiter," his eyes rested on her, "you will decide whether you want to run a house or merely host one. You will not rearrange again without reason." Marco opened his mouth, but Wolfe stopped him with a flick of his hand. "And you will stop snarling at correction. You are a chef, not a dragon that closed the book for the moment." Wolfe leaned back, eyes shut, hands settled. The room exhaled. I saw Evelyn Reiter watching him with something halfway between gratitude and terror. Lydia's expression was pure calculation. Urquhart rose too carefully and walked out without a word. Wolfe did not open his eyes again until the door closed. Then he said, "Archie, you will escort Miss Vance home. Watch her hands. Report if they tremble." She smiled faintly, and for the first time that night it wasn't rehearsed. "I assure you, Mr. Wolfe," she said, "my hands never tremble." But as I helped her into her coat, I noticed her thumb brushing the seam of the case. Slow, precise, and just once, uncertain. The ride back from Lydia's building was quiet, which is not the usual condition. When I'm alone with my thoughts, they were loud enough to rattle. She'd gone inside without looking back, her case clutched like a relic, and I'd filed the twitch of her thumb where Wolfe likes such things kept. Useful for later, not decisive yet. By the time I reached the brownstone, I knew Wolfe would already have sorted the twitch, the screw, the pantry, and the whole parade into his private filing cabinet. He was in his chair, eyes shut, hands steepled, the screw and the card still sitting on the blotter like a pair of misbehaving school children. I gave him the report anyway, because Wolfe doesn't need words but demands them. She didn't tremble, I said. Not exactly. But she traced the seam of that case once, as if it had bitten her. His lids lifted halfway. That suffices. He let me wait while he poured beer into his great bulk, sipping like a man who knows patience is half the drink. Then he spoke. "Archie, what was stolen?" "Certainty," I said, repeating his earlier line. "Phooey, words. Something tangible. The hinge screw," I guessed. "No, that was garnish." "What was stolen," Wolfe said, eyes sharpening, "was my name, attached to a petty spectacle, turned into currency for chatter. Mr. Urquhart intended to spend me, to inflate his trade by making Nero Wolfe part of his puppet show. That is what we have taken back, I admit. It landed. He'd been maneuvering not for silver, not even for Rusterman's reputation, but for his own, his name kept intact, unsullied by cheap bitterness. "So Urquhart?" I asked. Yes, he was the hand. Miss Vance was the needle, Klein the broom, Miss Reiter the unwitting lever. Urquhart stitched them into a pattern and hoped I would either rage or ignore. Either would have profited him. Instead, we have left him naked. And Vance. Agile, complicit, but not originator, she will survive by attaching to another fool. Let her. She has learned that coffee brewed here is not to her taste. I wanted to ask about Evelyn, who'd confessed to her pantry stunt with a steadiness that wasn't for show. Wolfe anticipated me. "Miss Reiter will endure. She loves her house, even if she fusses it into folly. She came to me because she understood instinctively that an insult staged with bitterness must be answered with certainty. She will now be more careful. That suffices for her, too." He closed his eyes, settled back, and the house's air changed again, easing. The case was over. Later, after dinner, saddle of lamb, sauce soubise, Fritz in quiet triumph. I sat across from Wolfe while he leaned into the plate like a man restoring balance to the world. When he was finished, he dabbed his lips, reached for beer, and gave me the last word, though in his style it's never really last. "Bitterness, Archie, is tolerable only in proportion. On the tongue it sharpens. In life it corrodes. Those who wield it as spectacle discover that it turns, always, inward. Our friend Mr. Urquhart will find it, so I grinned. I'll drink to that. Not coffee, he warned, closing his eyes again. No, I said, raising my cup. This time, beer. And that was how the affair over bitter coffee ended. The pot restored to its sideboard, the brownstone back in its silence, and Wolfe, as always, having the last taste.